Dr. William Ted McDaniel, how are you doing?
I'm well. Nobody ever calls me William. You know, that's what my mother used to say when I had done something wrong and she needed to get my attention. She would then say William Theodore. She would say the full proper name.
Well, I always just called you Doc or Dr. McDaniel.
Right. I'm very much aware of that.
Yeah, and because I have so much respect for you. I appreciate everything that you've done for me. Um, hiring me at Ohio State, and that being a great opportunity. And of course, I'm still at Ohio State, and I'm the director of jazz studies now, and followed you up. Um,
Was the idea.
yeah. So let me ask, how's your family?
Well, fine. My wife Bernice is doing well, and uh, we often go to Atlanta where our youngest son Elliot and his wife and uh, baby and almost the second baby. That's her home, Atlanta. That's my wife's home. So we get down there often. And uh, Teddy moved from Texas to Charlotte. So he's sort of on this side of the world now. Charlotte's only a 7.5 hour drive.
Yeah.
So, we can even do that. But I've never really liked to drive past the airport. So I would fly to Cincinnati if it made sense. Uh, but that's how we're spending our time. I've been doing these cruises. I think I told you,
Yeah.
because when you're retired, man, it's a whole different, it's a whole different thing. I've been working all of my life, and I really don't have anything that I just absolutely have to go to. I'm still active with the uh, Ohio Speakers Bureau. So they keep me, jumping around the state for lectures and stuff. So that's worked well. I've been with them now probably, I don't know, at least a dozen years. So
Mhm.
that's been a good thing. So I'm
And
working when I want to. Yeah.
yeah, my dad has been retired since before I took the job at Ohio State. So I came to Ohio State in 2004,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and he was retired. I think it was a couple years before that, and he seemed to settle right into it like immediately.
Mm-hmm.
He was like, well, I just do what I want to do, how I want to do it.
Sure.
It's on his own schedule, and that's been uh, it's been a good thing because he's been able to get back to some things that I think he wanted to
Sure.
focus on.
Oh,
So
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't have any problem. I felt like I did my time, and when my time was up, you know, then you move on. Uh, I did 35 straight years at Ohio State, so I think I spent enough time. So
well, God bless you.
thank you.
Um, well, one thing I was thinking about was, and this was after you retired. We brought you back for one of our jazz festivals. It was a couple years ago when we did Charlie Parker with strings,
Oh yeah. Hmm.
and that presentation that you did uh, uh, was profound. I was very moved by that, and I watch it every once in a while. Actually, um, I watched it just a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
Because such a great context for the concert and very meaningful. And we certainly were happy. I was certainly, overjoyed that you were able to do that. And I couldn't think of anyone else I couldn't think of anyone else that I wanted to do that presentation than you.
Well, thank you very much. I was honored to do it. Bird, as you know, was a very important person uh, in my life as well. I mean, you can't uh, fall in love with modern jazz and not know something about Charlie Parker because he helped to develop everybody in a sense. I mean, from creating the vocabulary and modes of expression that he was doing, in a recording that lasted for 2.5 minutes. He say so much in a couple choruses. I mean, it was unreal when you think about it.
Yeah,
But yeah, no, thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, I was happy to do that.
he was totally rewriting the rules
Oh,
as
absolutely.
he as he was
Yeah,
improvising.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's like the guy was from a different planet, you
yeah.
know.
And the thing that as I think about Charlie Parker, because I didn't, my knowledge of Charlie Parker was not directly because of Charlie Parker. I learned about Charlie Parker uh, through Cannonball.
Right, I remember you
Cannonball
telling
was
me that.
my
Yeah,
guy in the ninth grade that really just kind of turned my head around, and it was the recording, uh, the little jazz waltz, this here.
yeah.
That did it, man. When I heard that, that just, I just never could uh, uh, get that out of me. That was, totally ingrained um, in every way. And so I was in the cannonball. And then by the time I was ninth grade, by the time I got to college, um, I started to appreciate Charlie Parker. And as you know, I'm also a big Stitt man. Uh,
No.
Stitt's sound uh, for uh, for that 1940s, 50s, early 50s alto sound was a sound that
Oh yeah.
it was just pleasing, man. It was it was so pleasing. Uh, and but I mean, Bird was a master. I mean, that's all you have to say.
Yeah. 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 The baddest that ever did it. Right. So I was trying to track back in my mind when we met because we met many years before
Oh yeah,
I took
I
the job.
remember exactly. I can tell you exactly where we were. We were in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty certain it was New York City. It was at an IAJE conference, and you were jamming with a piano player one night. Um, the big evening concerts were often somewhere around 8 o'clock or so, and that big concert had ended, and folks were scattering, rushing to the bar and everything. Uh, I and a buddy of mine um, needed to stop in the men's room. So we went down this corridor at the hotel, and I heard this alto, man. I heard this alto, and I knew immediately that it was not a recording. You can kind of tell when it's live as opposed to a recording. Uh, and you were down very near the men's room, not in the men's room, but where you all were jamming
Mm-hmm.
was very near the men's room. So I stopped because I was drawn uh, to what you were playing, and I stopped and saw this youngster who was just burning up the horn, and course, your dad was a few feet away,
Hmm.
and so we ended up meeting that night. And I, of course, met Mickey as well. Um, I would say, and you would know better than I, but I would say you were probably 15-ish, somewhere around then. Uh, Still in high school,
Yeah.
not yet in college. You were still in high school, and so that is the very first time that we met. And then fast forward, of course, uh, I never uh, forgot about you. I always remembered you. Uh, and I was doing in the mid 90s, I want to say somewhere around 93, and I had the program. I actually had a program. I stumbled upon a program just a few years ago, and I'm a pack rat, man. I keep everything. I may be unable to put my finger on it exactly what I want it,
Hmm.
but I know I have it. Uh, and I was doing a jazz festival in the spring, like always, and um, uh, had a few dollars and called up your dad and said, "Hey, man, I'd like to get you as a feature act uh, for the Ohio State University Jazz Festival." And he said, "Fine." We were able to work out the terms, and boom, you were one of the featured artists that year. Now, I want to say, and I'm going to strictly off of trying to recall, but I want to say this was somewhere in the early mid '90s. If that makes sense to you, what year did you come out of? When did you finish high school? What year did you finish high school?
93.
Okay, you finished in '93. Well, I don't know, Sean. This could have been '93. You came down with a band.
Yeah.
I didn't have you as a featured soloist with us. You brought a band down with you,
Right.
um, and I just don't recall uh, the other members now. But I need to look back at that program.
I would have to look at the program too, because honestly, I don't remember who would have been in my band at that time. I mean,
Yeah,
I have there's like a short list of folks that I
sure, of
know it
course.
would have been, but um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and then fast forward
Right.
um,
I
to
had. Go ahead.
fast forward to what 2004.
Okay. Well, what happened? Let me see. Um, at the time, um, I was uh, I had hired Hank Marr, uh, who was uh, who was my very first hire, and and um, I had said that I was going to get a full time saxophone person. I mean, saxophone and trumpet. I mean, those are just fundamentally horns that you cannot do without if you're going to talk about the world of jazz because they've been involved with the music from its inception. Uh,
Right.
and the saxophone brought uh, jazz largely due to Charlie Parker and made it a modern style in the 1940s.
Yeah.
After Johnny Hodges and Don Redman and all those other guys, Sidney Bechet. I mean, just like you said, Bird just, he just changed the rules. You know, but so um, let's see now. Was Ferez on the faculty when you got there?
No.
Okay, all right then. So um, I think the saxophone teacher, I had gone through uh, a few. Uh, Gene Walker had been there for a while. Vince Andrews. I think Gene might have succeeded Vince Andrews. Uh, Byron Rooker, uh, before he fell on some very challenging times, uh, was there for a short while. Um, and Pete Mills.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, as you know, it's every head of any unit is always you spend more time fighting uh, to get the green light on a faculty position. That's just the nature of the nature of the beast in the academy, uh, and especially in the School of Music at Ohio State. Uh, but I had finally gotten the green light uh, to hire somebody full time, and that's what I wanted because, well, I mean, part time guys. I mean, they give you as much as they can give you, but you know, uh, if they got something else in their life that will give them a few more dollars for this week or for a couple weeks or a tour or something like that, they've always got a good reason to come in wanting to get away, and so you're always looking ultimately um, for somebody with some level of seriousness about what they want to do, what's the level of their commitment, what's the level of their investment in the job. That's what you want from them, because only then when they decide to make the investment can you be reasonably certain that they'll be operating at their max, at their optimal level, theoretically, anyway, So I finally got the green light on a saxophone person. Um, and like most of my hires, you go in um, with being open, but you know, it's kind of your job to kind of know who's out there. Uh, you know, I always took that responsibility seriously because you had to do that when you had to depend on a lot of part-time people. Anyway, so I was active in jazz education uh, and in music departments and music schools. So I had a very good sense of what the lay of the land looked like. And uh, quite frankly, you were somebody uh, who was on my list. And I called you. I called you and uh, told you I thought you should take a look at this, uh, consider it, and you did, and basically the rest is history. You know, you ended up getting the job, and when when you hire somebody, that always means you're displacing somebody else.
Hmm.
But that's the nature. That's the nature of the game. I mean, there's no way to get around that. You try to. I always tried to be kind and friendly, uh, uh, but that depends on the circumstances.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember the first day you were here. I remember the first week when you wore your black suit and white shirt and black tie and hat. You know,
Yeah.
your Sunday go to church meeting hat, Sunday go to church hat.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, that's part of it. You grow into a situation and environment and all of that. That's part of the adapting. and I understood that. I just tried to be a be a good mentor to get you on a on a path that was going to ultimately lead to some levels of reward and success. You know.
Well, one thing I have to say, um, first of all, you were a terrific mentor, and I appreciate uh, all of the extra time that you spent. Because it wasn't like you didn't have anything to do, but every time I would call you, or your, knock on your door and you were in your office, you never hesitated to spend as much time as I wanted to talk uh, to me about whatever, whatever my concern was.
Right.
And that was uh, that was very important for me. And I appreciate you taking that kind of time when I know that you were definitely had to be pushing something back or sacrificing to be able to do that with that kind of regularity. So I really appreciate that. And and I think about uh, one of the qualities that you had that you have that I try to that I try to model. Having taken over for you, that's one of the primary ones. It's always to be available, always to be willing to talk. Um, and so, anyhow, that was uh, very important, I think, for my development and for me to understand the academy to that extent. And so I thank you very much for that. Now that we've provided some context for our conversation, how we know each other, some of our history, our mutual history, we're really here to dig more into Dr. Ted McDaniel.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you talk to us about where you're from and where you grew up and what your childhood was like, and maybe sounds around your house as you were growing up, and then maybe some early mentor figures and maybe early teachers in
Right.
music?
Well, I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, right on the mighty Mississippi River. Just coincidentally, I was literally born on Bill Street. Uh, Bill Street, of course, is the uh, commercial, artistic, uh, defining uh, avenue for Black Memphis. Um, and it's where everything happened. What happened in the 1940s and 50s, most Black people born in Memphis were born in the colored ward of the John Gaston City Hospital. Uh, I wasn't. There was a Black physician in town who had his own clinic, and it was on Bill Street. And my dad and mom used to tell me that he had probably 4 rooms in there, and that's where I was born. Now, of course, it wasn't until many years later that I started to attach some significance to Bill Street. Uh, it takes a while to acquire some knowledge and some understanding and some import uh, about Bill Street. I now, when I'm uh, referencing the city, I always talk about the Bill Street aesthetic, because I think there is a Bill Street aesthetic, and I know the people who came out of that from Fred Ford, to Finest Newborn, to Booker T, to Maurice White, to George Coleman, to Lewis Smith, all of those guys. That's where the clubs were. That's where the barbecue joints were, uh, and that's where the blues was made.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say something about that later on. But in any case, my pathway was um, really established at home. Uh, both my parents were college graduates, educated people, so and both school teachers. My mother spent much of her life uh, as an elementary school teacher. She was from D.C. She was born in Washington D.C. And my dad was from Texas, just outside of Dallas, a little bitty town called Greenville. And he wound up in Memphis after uh, getting a job at George Washington Carver uh, School in Mississippi, in Holly Springs, Mississippi, which is about a little less than 50 miles out of Memphis. And he tells me, I think it was 1940, he had built that band up and was recognized, and he got offered to become the band director at Lanier High School in Jackson, Mississippi. And he had verbally accepted that job when he got a call from Memphis to come to Booker T. Washington in Memphis. And make a long story short, he ended up going to Memphis, met my mother, and they married. And so my history started when I was born in 1945 in Memphis, Tennessee. And my dad, during the whole decade of the 40s, was the only black band director at Memphis High School. He was at one in the morning and the other one in the afternoon. The only two they had. They had Booker Washington on the south side of town and Manassas on the north side of town. And my dad was a piano player and a trumpet player, but his principal job was serving as the band director there, and so many guys came up under his tutelage, and he used to go out and gig and what have you. So music was always in the house. My mother loved jazz singers, and her favorite one, I'd say one or two, was either Dakota Staten was a favorite of hers, and what's the woman's name who married the pro football player? Dinah Washington. Okay, those were her two favorites, but she liked Ella, and she liked Sarah Vaughan. So I heard that kind of stuff growing up. And there was a turning point that I didn't realize was a turning point, Sean, till later on. Memphis was rigidly segregated. There were two black movie theaters right downtown on Beale Street. and there was one on the north side of town and one on the south side. The one on the south side of town was 5 minutes from my house, and it was called a W.C. Handy Theater. And they used to have stage shows. And I must have been, probably 5 or 6 years old. And my dad took me to a concert where this black orchestra walked out in tuxedos with these shiny brass instruments. It was the Duke Ellington Orchestra.
Oh
Okay.
wow.
And I had never seen anything like that before. And that just, that was just something that I never ever forgot. And I don't say that to say that that's when I decided to become a uh, musician, but I never forgot that image, and I was impressed with that. Um, and my father having the job that he had, we always had people in and out of the house all of the time. Um, Lewis Smith, the trumpet player, uh, he was up in Ann Arbor for years in Detroit.
Yeah,
Um,
I played with Lewis. He played in my band actually
he
for a
he
period.
he used to tell me, uh, "Man, you better you better not say anything to me when your daddy and mama couldn't find uh, some girl in the band to come and babysit you while they went out somewhere. I'd get called because uh, Mr. Mack knew my knew my mama real well, and my daddy and all of my family. So he said, I babysat you. He said, you couldn't have been any more than maybe 3 or 4 years old. And he came to the house to take care of me. But I just grew up meeting a lot of people, and my dad used to take me to rehearsals. So it wasn't like there was any kind of pressure, man. I just fell in love uh, with the music because I was around musicians. Uh, I never had a white teacher until I went to college. Uh, I went first through 12th grade at Hamilton. That's unimaginable. When I tell my kids that, they said, Dad, that's impossible. You got to be exaggerating. I'm not exaggerating. I went from first through 12th grade at Hamilton High School. Now, there was an elementary section,
Mm.
uh, which was in one building, and there was a junior high school. We didn't have middle school back in the 50s. I graduated from high school in 63. So we didn't have uh, middle school, and then there was the big high school. And so uh, we didn't lack for anything. I didn't even realize that white people were involved in education because everybody in my classes, all of my teachers were black. That's just the way it was. That's what segregation was all about in the South. This was pre-busing, um, pre-desegregation, of course. So anyway, um, I got engaged in a wonderful music situation. Uh, you've heard me mention by the time I got to high school, uh, the guys who were in high school uh, uh, with me, uh, Booker T with Booker T and the MGs, uh, was 1 year in front of me in high school. I always felt like Booker T was the most musical. Uh, you know, he was kind of like you. He could play anything. Uh, uh, Boo was the best trombonist in high school I had ever heard. I'd never heard anybody play Flight of the Bumblebee on a slide trombone as he did. And he was so good that when he finished high school, he went to do a master's degree in brass performance at Indiana University, okay, which during those days was probably the toughest of the major schools to get into, and their uh, performance areas are just creme de la creme. You know, uh, people knew Boo because of that Green Onion hit that he had his senior year in high school. With Al Jackson and Steve Cropper and Doug Dunn, two white boys, two black boys. Um, but Boo was 1 year in front of me. Maurice White, founding leader, Earth, Wind, and Fire, um, was 2 years in front of me. Uh, Reese played drums in the marching band, played in the concert band, was a doo-wop singer. Uh, always, always playing uh, with some group. Uh, Isaac Hayes was 3 years in front of me. Carla Thomas was 3 years in front of me. And these are just people who have acquired some kind of national name for themselves. But there were many others. Al Green's director Fred Jordan, trumpet player, was a year behind me. He and I were together from fourth or fifth grade. His daddy also taught at Booker Washington, and his sister and I were good friends. It was segregated, but the music environment was so rich. And the interesting thing about those days, and that's why even now when I'm out lecturing about it, I often talk about the tradition of what I call Black social improvised music, because it was that kind of category, that kind of umbrella, where you didn't get pigeonholed into being, okay, well, he's a jazz musician, or he's a blues cat, or he's an R&B cat. Hey man, it's all the same thing. It's just a different kind of treatment. You use a different kind of fertilizer for this versus that versus the other. But it's all coming off that strong river called the blues, okay, which is like the root of gospel, of jazz, of rock, and most popular music. That's just a fact. Anybody not understanding that needs to come and spend some time in Memphis, Tennessee, or New Orleans, or some southern place where they can hear that all the time. So I'm saying that to say, cats like Lewis Smith, man, they played for proms, they played for other dances. Of course, they got into the jazz clubs whenever they got to that point. And ultimately, you make decisions about which bank you want to put your investment in the jazz bank, or you want to do the blues thing. Evelyn Young was a tenor saxophone player. I was looking for some stuff down in my basement over the weekend. And I came up on this picture, Evelyn Young, who was in the B.B. King Orchestra. B.B. King and my daddy were very, very good friends. And she was the female saxophonist in the B.B. King Orchestra. And let me tell you, man, she could put most cats to shame, okay? You never hear about her because jazz, like much of the music in the popular world, had sexist attitudes, unfortunately, for a good many years. toward female horn players. Females are supposed to sing or play piano, you know, uh, or play instruments like the clarinet and the flute. You didn't see them with a tenor saxophone or a trombone or kicking a set of drums. So things have changed, but that's another whole discussion we'll get into sometime. I got some really pointed thoughts about that because I've been uh, observing that for a good many years. But there was just so much music, man. There was just so much music, and people were not so hung up on uh, whether or not you um, you played with this kind of group or that kind of group. Uh, if you played your horn, you would likely get called upon uh, to play various styles, and that's what you learned. And so the church music was was very central to all of that. Memphis is one of the major centers of gospel music, man. I mean, uh, that's the root there. That's just the root. Uh, I think I think some educated, quote unquote, uh, black musicians for a long while might have had some um would second guess people who came out of the black church who didn't read
Hmm.
but who could play like crazy, and we all know people like that. I mean, I mean, there are a couple of them here in town. Their reading is what we call very suspect, and you couldn't use them on certain gigs if they had to come right in and you know you put some paper in front of them. But hey, man, that has nothing to do with their levels of musicianship and their understanding of that aesthetic. I mean, they can deliver. you know, I mean, that's like questioning whether or not Aretha Franklin can sing. Hey, come on, give me a break, man. Give me a break. But so Memphis was full of that. I mean, just absolutely full of it. Uh, uh, you had a church on the corner and a whiskey store across the street, cat a corner from that, and a mom and pop grocery store across in that same intersection. You know, everything was there. I mean, uh, and so that served the community, and we learned that that our music is culturally based. I mean, that's what made it different. That's why when black musicians, uh, when the jazz guys uh, became able to tour places like Paris and other parts of Western Europe and uh, uh, back in the 30s and 40s, and uh, it was the cultural aspect of the sound that made it unique and made it uniquely different to what any trained Western European uh, model could do, and that's what set it apart, and that has what has always kept it different, you know. And for a long time, it was hard to find white musicians, I think, in the jazz world who could uh, not so much master, but really play inside of the tradition, because you got to absorb the tradition, man. It's like, I like to use the analogy uh, in the classical world for black singers uh, who want to do the operatic thing. Well, hey man, I mean, you got to wear the Verdi and Puccini and Rossini hat because they define the principles and the aesthetic of Italian opera. I mean, there's no greater opera on the earth than that. So if you're going to do that, you got to somehow get that cap to fit on your head, right? And I say the same thing for anybody coming from anywhere outside of a black community. If they're going to play the blues, if they're going to play jazz in the tradition, I'm not talking about those who are in the margins, but if they're going to play in the tradition, and what I mean by the tradition, I'm talking about the swing that developed in the late 20s and early 30s, largely because of what that saxophone did to take some of that wicked rhythmic stuff that those clarinetists down in New Orleans and the trumpet players, saxophone helped to smooth all that over. That's one of the roles that the big bands helped. Well, you're playing with the Basie Orchestra now, so I mean, so you're doing it every day whenever you play with them. It's basically blues based, and it's about blend and balance. It's that heterogeneous sound ideal that Ollie Wilson talked about. That it was hard for white players to understand how successful those earlier bands were. That they could have different approaches to sound, but they could make that diversity of expression work. The model I like to think of, the original Temptations, with Eddie Kendricks and David Ruffin and all those guys. Man, they had different voices, but you recognized them immediately because when they came together, you knew it. And that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. And that's what I think, why I believe that one needs to have some respect for culture. I think of myself as a culturalist. That music is a significant aspect. There are particular qualities and attributes that define a cultural reality, and you can learn some of it in a book, but you ain't gonna learn all of it in a book,
Yeah.
But I'm kind of getting off on a
No, no, no. This has all been great. So
So for me,
was
my first instrument was clarinet.
yeah.
It was because of John Jones, uh, who was in my dad's high school band. I was only, John used to come by the house all the time. He was 6'6". I'll never forget. He was the biggest human being I had ever seen. But he played clarinet. And because he played clarinet, that was the first instrument that I wanted to play. I didn't even really start to do much with a saxophone. I started on clarinet when I was in 5th grade, and I did the usual school thing because that was my pathway. And playing in school bands, and when I got to high school, doing the gigs that everybody around started to do. But I didn't really pick up saxophone till about the 8th grade. And I was more of an alto player than a tenor. Tenor was an instrument that it was just easy. It was just easier for me to go from clarinet to alto than it was from clarinet to tenor. Uh, but that was, that was Memphis. Um, and I ended up going to college. Uh, I went to Black College, uh, Morehouse, which transformed me in another way. I was in college. I graduated from high school in '63, and of course, the two major uh, legislative uh, achievement of its time in the civil rights thing came about during that time. One was, of course, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Uh, and I was right in the middle. All of that happened when I was transitioning from uh, high school to college. I get to Atlanta. I'm at Dr. King's alma mater. I'm at the uh, epicenter, as they talk about every day about the virus. Atlanta was the epicenter for uh, SCLC uh, and SNCC during those days. That's where they had their offices. And the marches would start over in Atlanta University Center. Morehouse, Spelman, Morris Brown, Clark, Atlanta University, and the seminary. Uh, and they would come over to the campus to recruit college students to be in those marches. And my roommate now, our freshman year, my roommate was a drummer from Englewood, New Jersey, a very fine drummer uh, who's a an oral surgeon now. He lives in St. Petersburg, Florida, and we both got arrested. Um, but I only say that to say that sharpened another political reality for me that raised my social consciousness to another whole level. I began to understand the institution of segregation. I had just been a participating member growing up because you didn't have any choice. If you rode the bus, you went to the back of the bus. You know, if you went to a store, you had to go to the restroom. You go to the one that had the colored sign on it. You wanted to drink out of this water fountain. It was your choice. You wanted to go to school, you went to the black schools. You passed right by white schools, but you went. So I had been up until that time, while I was uh, an excellent student, uh, my pencil didn't get sharpened politically and intellectually until I got to college, where I started to make some intellectual sense of social reality. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
So that was important. That was important, man, because in Atlanta in those days, all this all the marches when they'd come back to campus, man, they'd be singing, uh, and so music was always surrounding that. They weren't just always singing "We Shall Overcome." They were singing hip stuff, and again, so many gospel tunes, so many jazz tunes came out of those uh, uh, melodies. And that was just a part of the experience of the time. I mean, it was a great period, man. It was a great period that just opened me up uh, intellectually in brand new ways. So that was a factor in my life. Uh, I got a chance to meet some very important historical figures who came to campus. Leroy Jones um, published his seminal book, Blues People,
Mm-hmm.
in 1963, the year that I graduated from high school. And I read that, um, and just the opportunity to kind of, have some engagement with and interaction with, uh, kind of helped shape me into the person that I wound up being.
So, when you finished at Morehouse,
Mm-hmm.
where'd you where'd you go?
What happened? I wasn't a conscientious objector to the war. I just didn't want to carry a rifle. And so I felt like I had to jump into grad school immediately just so I wouldn't get drafted. In April of my senior year at Morehouse, I got a letter. I had to go home to Memphis uh, to take a physical for the draft board, which I did. And basically was told that upon graduating, expect to be drafted. Well, I kind of had other plans. And while I didn't have any objection to those who wanted to go to the Army, and I understand why people choose uh, things for themselves that may be different from my own choices. I wasn't a conscientious objector, but I wasn't interested in going to Vietnam because I saw so many youngsters who were in high school with me go over there and they never came back except in body bags. They were fighting an enemy over there that really, when you think about it, had done nothing to black people. Okay. Uh, but our country got stuck in there for too long. So, in order to not have to go there, I hopped into grad school. Now, I had gone up to Michigan in February of my senior year at Morehouse. That would have been February of 1967 to the CBDNA, the College Band Directors National Association meeting, held up in Ann Arbor in Hill Auditorium, U of M. And that was my first choice. I thought the Michigan band was just the last word. The symphony band, uh, uh, the marching band, Lewis Smith uh, had become band director at Forsyth Junior High School in Ann Arbor. And he had done his master's degree up in Ann Arbor. So that's kind of where that was my first choice. Now, so I went up to Ann Arbor in February of my senior year to take an audition. I got in. I passed the audition. At the time, up at U of M, at that time, while there was jazz on campus, like most places still, it was underground. Okay, it wasn't a legitimate degree granting program yet, for sure. But they had begun to start to have some jazz performance in the music school, still very limited at that time. But the campus was full of fantastic musicians, as a state, with the city of Detroit there. I mean, my goodness, I don't have to tell you about that. You've lived in the area, so you know it. But when I graduated, I needed to hop into school that summer. I couldn't sit out the summer and wait till September till classes started. So I had only applied to three schools. Michigan was number one, Iowa was number two, and the University of Illinois was number three. And the reason Iowa was on the list, uh, Iowa has a fantastic uh, instrumental music uh, program. And my major professor in Morehouse was Wendell Whalum, Kirk Whalum's uncle. Okay.
Mm.
The whole Whalum family. My father was the band director to all of the Whalums there of Kirk's father's generation. Kirk's dad, Kirk's uncle, uh, uh, and his uncle, who was my major professor at Morehouse, Wendell P. Whalum. Uh, they had been in my dad's high school band, and Wendell's mother, Kirk's grandmother, taught junior high school, taught junior high at my junior high school. Okay. And Kirk's aunt, Rose Marie, was in the ninth grade when I was a freshman in high school. I used to have a crush on her. Man, I thought she was the cutest, finest thing in the world. She ended up going to Spelman College, okay? Wendell's youngest sister, Kirk Whalum's aunt, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, speaking of Kirk is much younger than I am, but I saw Kirk. I had heard about him because by the time he came along, schools had desegregated, and there was busing all over Memphis. And Kirk actually didn't go to an all-black high school. It became all-black when white folks started fleeing to the suburbs. He came. He went to the school that became the magnet school for the performing arts. It's on the tip of my tongue. Is it Oakwood? It seems like it's Oak something, but in any case, that's where he went. And I remember hearing about him, you know, how when you go back home, you know, you hear, you know, cats are talking about who's doing what. And I started hearing about this young Whalum kid. Well, I got a chance to hear him in person when I came back on the faculty at Morehouse and went to New Orleans for the Southern Regional MENC conference. It was in New Orleans. And Kirk's high school band came. And he was a featured soloist with the jazz group. I never heard at that time, Sean, any saxophonist play of his age play round midnight with the depth and maturity of expression that Kirk Whalum played when I heard him in high school. Okay, I never forgot that. I remind him of that every time I see him. He was on the Blue Note cruise. You know, I go on this Blue Note jazz cruise every January. Kevin was on it this January.
Yeah.
And I went last year too. But every time I see Kirk, I remind him of that. Because to see a youngster play that tune like he understood that tune and was saying something on the tune, I was just amazed. You know, I was just amazed to, but his whole family, Kirk's uncle who died, I didn't find out till I was on the boat with them in January that Peanuts Whalum, who played the happy hour piano in a big hotel in downtown St. Louis, that he had just died. I think he died back in December 19. But I didn't learn that till I ran into him on the cruise. But Kirk is the only one of his family that didn't go to Morehouse. He went to Texas Southern. Kirk's brother, the singer, you know the singer?
Yeah.
Yeah, he went to Morehouse.
Right.
Uh, the other brother, Kenneth, went to Morehouse. The younger brother, they're still no. Kenneth Jr. has a young brother who's a hell of a little tenor saxophone player. He's still in his 20s. He went to Morehouse. Oh, everybody went to Morehouse except Kirk. I tell Kirk, I said, Kirk, that's your problem. You know, you just didn't go to Morehouse. You know. But the moral of that, man, was that uh, there was just so much. There was just so much music around, and I used doing a master's degree to keep me out of Vietnam. And I always felt like the master's degree was the easiest degree that of my 3 degrees. I had no problem uh, doing a master's degree. And I was only away 1 year. Uh, I did the summer. I graduated from Morehouse on a Tuesday, June 2nd. The following weekend, I was checking into a dormitory up at the University of Iowa in Iowa City. And uh, I was there that summer. I was there first and second semester and the summer following. And I finished up my master's degree. What happened? Dr. Whalum called me. The reason Iowa was on the list, Whalum had done his PhD at Iowa. He and Wendell Logan used to be up at Oberlin, who was head of the jazz program.
Yeah.
Wendell was a doctoral student when I was a master's student. And Ollie Wilson had done his PhD at Iowa, and so had Wendell Whalum, and so had the composer T.J. Anderson. Man, so these were some brothers who were some cats that I just looked up to, man, and I saw what they were all about and the kind of seriousness of purpose that they had. So when I called Michigan to tell them that I couldn't wait till September. I needed to come that summer. Michigan told me, well, we already have our quota for the summer. We can't take anybody in Ann Arbor. What you could do, we could arrange for you to go up to Interlochen. And I'm saying to myself, I had always wanted to go to the National Music Camp when I was in high school. That was a little far away for me to go. Ironically enough, my folks sent me to summer music school up at the University of New Hampshire because that was just a few hours north of New York City where all my mother's people were. So my aunt paid for me to go there in the summer. I didn't go to Interlochen, and I didn't want to be stuck up out in the woods in Interlochen after leaving Atlanta, Georgia, the mecca of black people, of black culture. I just wasn't, I wasn't ready for any kind of culture shock. So I told Michigan, thank you, but no thank you. I'll see y'all in September. I called Illinois and couldn't talk with the person I needed to speak with at Illinois. I called Iowa. I got the director of the School of Music, Jaime Voxman, wrote all those Rubang books, became one of my clarinet professors. Jaime Voxman told me, well, I'm looking at your record right now. Yes, you can come this summer, and the money we were going to pay you on your scholarship, we'll start it this summer. So, man, 5 days after graduating from Morehouse, I was at the University of Iowa doing a master's degree. Okay?
Huh.
That's how it happened, Sean. And I was only gone for a year before I was back at Morehouse. Well, when the Whalum called me, he was talking about wanting to get me back. as the assistant band director. Uh, and I said, hey, yeah, I'll be happy to come to Atlanta. Um, and hell, I wasn't, but let's see. I had a master's degree at, I think I finished, I had a master's degree at 22, and days later I turned 23 by the time I got back to Atlanta, because my birthday's in September. So, but the band director at Morehouse quit. He resigned the job because he got a job in Phoenix, Arizona. Excuse me, not Phoenix. Yeah, Phoenix, Arizona, of a big high school, and which was paying much more money than what he was getting when he was in Morehouse. So a month before I got down to Atlanta, I got another call saying, hey, man, you were the student conductor here 4 years. You're going to become the band director. And that's how I got thrown into the deep water. And the rest is history. That was my career path. That was my career path. And Wendell Whalum, Kirk Whalum's uncle, is the primary reason for that. He's now deceased, unfortunately. But the McDaniel family and the Whalum family were very, very close. All the Kirk's uncles and aunts I know very, very well, and his grandmother, Mrs. Whalum, as we call her.
So, a couple things. So, one is, how did you arrive at Ohio State?
Okay.
And then another thing I wanted you to talk about, and I think we're going to have to wrap it up, is I want you to talk about your composing, in particular, for marching bands.
Okay. Well, let me tell you how that happened. It's called doing what you have to do. When you are in a black institution, you can't go to Ideal Music Store in the next block from Richie's that became Macy's department store, walk in the music store and buy some James Brown or a Temptation song or any other black music, pretty much. Okay. So what you do an arrangement of it. Okay. And I can tell you that was the same Lewis Smith told me. That's how he got started. Thanks to Edward Lewis Smith, when he was my wife's high school band director in Atlanta at Booker T. Washington, before he went to Tennessee State, where he was the assistant director and he was the music arranger. And when I was in high school, we used to go up to Nashville a couple times a football season, and I'd see the band. I'd always go up for the Florida A&M game. I'd try to get up for either Jackson State or Grambling and what have you. These schools were still segregated, and they had terrific bands. And Sean, the first time I ever heard Dizzy's A Night in Tunisia that I remember was an Edward Lewis Smith arrangement of it for the Tennessee State University marching band, the aristocrat of bands, as it's as it's called. And I never forgot this, man. He had 11 trombones out front and 11 tenor saxophones. Trumpets came in behind that. Man, I was about 10th or 11th grade. Blew my mind. Okay. Quincy Jones was doing all this incredible big band stuff, Walk on the Wild Side. Remember when those albums came out? That was maybe a little bit ahead of you. But all of that stuff, Smitty and Danny Owens and the guys down at FAMU, and in fact, all of the black colleges. The band director at Jackson State, Prof. William Davis, played trumpet with Cab Calloway and with Count Basie. So, he was an up and up jazz musician like Lewis Smith. So what I'm saying, back in those days, it was less of a kind of a hardcore, you only swim in this pool. I mean, guys did what they did, man. It was about using your craft in as creative a way as you needed for this purpose in order to accomplish these objectives. I mean, it wasn't frowned upon. It was not frowned upon. That's just the way it was. And so that's how I got started. My daddy started encouraging me. My daddy taught me how to transpose. And when I was in the 8th grade. And so I had started to try to do some stuff when I was in high school. And by the time the 4 years I was in Atlanta Morehouse, Wendell P. Whalum made me student conductor of the Morehouse band when I was a freshman. I'll be happy to share with you the article that came out back in, I think, 1970. I still have a copy of the article when I created a jazz orchestra there on campus. It's a very, very nice article. But you wrote because you couldn't go and order that stuff. That stuff was kind of rare. Particularly the soul and typical black R&B stuff that black college bands want to play. Now, the biggest fight with those bands and the jazz musicians. Now, I talked to Wycliffe. Wycliffe's on that cruise, and there's another organization I want to get you interested in because I think you need to be a part of it. But we'll talk about that. But they argue that, those guys spend so much time with marching band, there's no future in marching band. There are no jobs out there in no marching band. They could be spending that kind of time teaching these kids how to play jazz. Okay, that's the big argument right now. That was not an argument in a previous generation. Okay, that was not an issue. I mean, all of the guys that came out of Memphis, horn players, many of them went into the Army, so they played the military music, and if they had any jazz chops at all, they played that. And the rest of the time, they played martial music. That was just the way it was. So, it's a very interesting kind of discussion, but that's how I got started. What happened at Ohio State, I left Atlanta in 77. I felt like it was time to go. Morehouse is a small, private, liberal arts college. I loved it. It was good to me. It was good for me. I got an opportunity to do some things there that I'm grateful for. Uh, but it was time to move on. My wife was a graduate of Spelman. She was from Atlanta. She was ready to leave Atlanta. Uh, we felt like we could be happy elsewhere. Not that we were unhappy where we were. We felt, there are other places outside the city of Atlanta. You talk to a lot of people in Atlanta, they think that's the only place that exists. But I got an opportunity to go to North Carolina, uh, North Carolina A&T State University. It's a state institution. Uh, I got the department chairmanship. Uh, I had got my PhD during the time I was on the Morehouse faculty. Uh, so I went to A&T as chair. I was able to do things, and I uh, got a call from Ohio State saying that there was a position uh, there uh, with a joint professorship in the School of Music and in the Department of Black Studies. Um, and I sent them a copy of my CV. This was in March when I got the telephone call, and didn't think anything about it. And in July, I got a call saying that I'm a finalist for the position. I said, my secretary said, Ohio State has called you. Please call them back. They've called twice today. And I called them back, and I was told that I was a finalist for the position. I was embarrassed. I said, what position? I don't even know the position. It's a position in African American music and jazz. Um, and we'd like for you to come up to interview or make a long story short. I hopped the plane. I came up. I interviewed all day in the music school. I interviewed the next day. I interviewed all day, and uh, what was then the Department of Black Studies, it became uh, my last year as chair, uh, the AAAS, Department of African American African Studies. And, the rest is history. Um, you know, so that's it. We'll, we'll have to do another interview because I feel like I'm just getting started.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. There's
Yeah,
so much.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah, there's so much that we can get into. We definitely can do this again.
you know,
Um, thanks so much for your time and your energy, and thanks for all that you've meant to me and all that you've done for me and influence that you've had on my career and on me as a person and everything. Something that people may like to know is uh, Dr. Ted McDaniel was actually in my wedding.
that's right. Absolutely. Yes, I
It's
was.
it's
That's right. Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well, you've been a great addition, and I have always believed that those of us who are in positions where we have a little bit of authority to determine what the unit in which you find yourself, uh, where you can help others out, you should do so. And I have always believed that Black intellectual capital is needed at these major universities. And so I never uh, failed to try to take advantage of when I could bring in somebody that looks like you and looks like me to try to make that happen. That's not uh, an anti white kind of thing, but it is unapologetically a pro black thing because I think that it's important for the academy in the large field of the black arts, of black history and culture, that the leadership in the field, in the field of inquiry be ought to have people who look like us in charge. Now, one of the big issues in jazz education, and we'll talk about this, could be a whole separate kind of thing to talk about jazz and race. And I would like to talk to you about that because jazz, I remember, I'm old enough to remember David Baker and I used to talk about this all the time. My wife, Bernice, when she finished Spelman, she went to Indiana. And of course, Dave was at IU.
Right.
And she had another summer to finish up her degree, which is in French. And so we had just got married. So I went to Indiana with her that summer, and I got a chance to work with David during that summer. And I know what they tried to do to him. And he's, in my opinion, historically, the most important modern jazz educator that we have had. And he has done so much for so many. Yet they tried to run that man into the ground and question him because they thought they could question him. And he was on an island as talented as he and prolific as he was. I know what he went through, but we always talked about, same thing with Nathan Davis over at Pittsburgh. We always talked about it was important, if we could, when we are no longer there and everybody has to retire so they can go on with the rest of their lives, that we'd hope that we'd be able to find some black leadership. And I remember when Nathan was looking, Nathan called me one day. Did you know Nathan Davis?
I don't think so.
Okay. Nathan was a hell of a saxophone player, man. Hell of a out of Kansas City. But Nathan called me, said, "Man, I am just frustrated as hell. I cannot find the right black person to head this department." He was having difficulty. And he finally was able to get Jerry Allen to come and take over. She did that for a while. Then when she went west, she died early. But it's a problem, man. It's a problem. But that's another issue for another time. I thank you for what we've done here this evening, and we'll just pick it up another time. But there's just a whole lot of. We didn't really even get a chance to talk about Ohio State or the necessary scholarly aspect of jazz education and just the field in general. I would like to talk about that.
Definitely. Well, definitely we'll have you back.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Well, God bless you, and good night.
Hey, thank you. Same
All
to
right.
you.
All right.
Did my best.